Thank you. I'm Elspeth MacDonald from Food Standards Scotland, and my question, I think, is for Alistair, but others might have views on it too. And it's really reflecting on Sir Kenneth's opening remarks. And I was quite struck by what he spoke about in relation to positive stories and the value of positive stories. So I guess what I'm interested in is whether things like the tools like the tracker could perhaps be used to gain insights into actually what impact those sorts of positive stories might have on changing what consumers do, whether it's in relation to food safety or better diet.
I think it's a sort of a two-way street, really. We can use the data from that in terms of what people are thinking to inform. I know it goes towards what Catherine and our team think about the marketing and the messaging that you guys use. I think something like the tracker is more at the other end, almost to monitor really what has been happening and what the impact of some of those things are, really, and to see what's happening more over time. And I think it's turning into the luxury for us is having something rather than just a one wave of something and a dip in something, is to be at a point where we now have multiple waves of tracking to be able to see what's happening over time. And I think it's now turning into quite a sensitive monitor, actually, for us to be able to see some of the shifts that we're seeing there today. So I think the tracker is more for the monitoring, and I think there's other ways. You know, some of my qualitative colleagues do a lot of work in terms of the nitty-gritty of what people think and what is driving some of those choices, what sort of messages are landing and what aren't with people, that can potentially better inform or also inform some of the messaging that gets used.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? I'll maybe take one from the board while people are thinking. We've got Ewan, right at the top there. Do you think there could be emptying food shelves in supermarkets on the 30th of March 2019, having just experienced that with the winter weather?
I genuinely got asked this question on Radio Scotland a couple of weeks ago during the Beast for the East. I think the idea that we're going to get emptying shelves, it's a beautiful kind of image. I don't think it's that. But if you're talking about disruption to the supply chain, absolutely. And a couple of really clear examples. We import lots of flowers from Holland. If you talk about the sort of delays we're talking about, if we default to a kind of WTO thing, you're talking about a quarter of the shelf life of that product being wiped out through delays, through transit, and that has a kind of double impact in Scotland, of course, because we have to get products in predominantly the south of England, and then they've got to get all the way up the country. So is it going to change availability? Absolutely. And is it going to perhaps restrict some products? And that goes in quite a lot of things, tomatoes and soft fruits. There's a huge range of products we import, and particularly on the customs side, these frictions really do disrupt supply chains, and ultimately that reduces availability and it increases cost.
Any questions? Yes?
Hello, Bill Adamson, Food Standards Scotland. Ewan, I guess just picking up on that last point there, you touched on the potential difficulties for imports with respect to a WTO or similar deal. And I guess from our perspective, we're trying to work out what capacity and capability issues there might need to be for us to address. And you're probably well aware that there are very few ports of designated entry, for example, for checking goods at the moment in Scotland. Would you envisage a situation whereby there might be different supply routes which might change the need for checking in ports in Scotland?
I mean, that's a superb question, and one that I would definitely am not able to give a definitive answer on. I think, though, it's just how it's going to flex the situation, and also the different levels we're talking about. I mean, we get a huge amount of product coming in from Ireland, of course, and through Northern Ireland, both in Holyhead, of course, through into Stranraer. How that whole gets managed, and the Northern Irish border particularly, how we find a solution to that problem, I think it's going to be really, really crucial. But you're right, there's only a few number of ports, and it comes back to that thing. Dover at the moment takes a huge quantity because so much traffic and so much product comes through Calais, and Folkestone takes a bit as well. And we just don't have the space for consignment inspections. I know that seems a really glib point, but it's quite important to have somewhere to put lorries.
True. Paul, are your customers becoming less interested in calorie content now and more interested in positive nutritional value? For example, the protein content and...
No, I think the biggest issue is calorie intake, and I think lots of people have almost said, diet. People aren't interested in diet anymore. They are, But I think it's in a slightly different world. I think everybody's looking at things far more holistically. People are more sophisticated about credit and debit across a week and so on. And I think we see that behavioural pattern. I think some of the things around fibre, vitamin D, omega-3, where we've been able to introduce that through reformulation and it hasn't required the customer to change anything, then actually we've seen some upside to that. So when we introduced the vitamin D in bread, we reversed the trend of the market was in decline on bread. We actually reversed that trend in our business with that because I think the customers saw the added benefit at no cost to them. Interestingly though, we put fibre into white bread about a year ago, and I don't know whether you remember, it was reported as M&S will no longer sell white bread. And I think that the way the media took that one was to actually, we were putting fibre in and it still is there and nobody's noticed a difference. But it was actually, there's no kind of, M&S has stopped selling white bread. And I think there's these moments of how we actually do that from a sort of reformulation perspective and add the benefit to the consumer, whilst at the same time just needing to take everybody on that journey with us.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Yes, lady in the green.
Yeah, Melanie Hargraves, British Nutrition Foundation. It's actually a question for Alistair, and it was really interesting seeing actual stats behind what I think a lot of people have suspected for a while, which is that people know that something needs to be done, but not for them. And I wondered if there's opportunities to probe a bit more into that and understand for the people that are making the changes, or kind of just what's going on there, because that feels like it's quite crucial and it would underpin a lot of work that could be done if there's a bit more understanding in that area. So just wondered if there are any plans to try and probe that a bit more.
It's something that we do look at in different ways, I suppose. There's no one overarching answer. I mean, it's a huge sort of psychological issue, I suppose, in terms of I understand these things, but it doesn't really relate necessarily to me. One thing I didn't go into in any great detail there, I talked briefly about parents. The chart I showed about people's perceptions of their own diet, I don't know if any of you picked up on it. It kind of showed a little bit of a seasonal variation in terms of I'm healthier in the summer than I am over the winter, which I think shows people are quite sensitive to what they're doing, but even within your own family, there's deflection. So one chart I didn't show was we ask exactly the same question about your family's health and diet, and it shows no variation over the seasons, anything at all, because the perception is my family is always healthy. So I know that I might have a little bit of chocolate sometimes, or more than sometimes, but as far as my family's concerned, I'm always going to make as much effort as possible. I know my kids are going to eat well. They're always the be-all and end-all. So I think even at that family level, there's a huge deflection in terms of people know what they're doing, but I'm confident my family's absolutely fine. So then when you take it to the societal level, it's a whole range of things. But the logic and people's reasoning for that is multifaceted. So yes, it's something that we sometimes look at in the qualitative research. It's things that we try and probe on a little bit more, but actually it needs to go down to sometimes that qualitative level and speaking to someone one-on-one and understanding what their reasoning and their logic is.
Ewan, there's a question that's become very popular. There's 3 likes against it. What can the SRC do to encourage retailers to minimise in-store promotions that push consumers to buy more crisps and confectionery?
I had a feeling I might not just get to talk about Brexit on this panel. 2 things. Firstly, as one of our members is sitting to my right, I'd assure that we're a membership-led organisation. I'd never tell my members what to do. More seriously, though, actually, we've been really clear. We welcome quite a lot in the government's diet and obesity strategy, but you can't have a voluntary approach to price and promotional activity. Certainly that not in our view. And the reason for that is we're touching on a fundamental part of competition between businesses. So we can't have a situation where retailer A and retailer B agree, oh, we're not going to price and promote things, we'll do it the same way, because that's actually anti-competitive, and that's really, really problematic. We've been clear if government wants to do this, and it may well choose to, it should do it on a mandatory basis. And we've, welcome to a debate about how that happens. And it's clear evidence and on clear definitions, because I think we have to be really specific when we start looking at this. The way people sort of glibly talk about unhealthy food, it's not like tobacco or alcohol where there are very specific criteria what determine what those products are. Food is unbelievably varied. Some foods in vast quantity will be terribly bad for you, in small amounts will be good, vice versa. There are some things that clearly are much closer to the less good for you end, but I think we have to be very specific, and defining this is actually quite tricky. I mean, it took the Treasury, I think, 18 months to define soft drinks when they're coming up with the soft drinks levy. These are quite nuanced things that you need quite a lot of detail on. We're not against that discussion. We're very happy to be part of that, and we'll continue to be constructively part of that, but it's not necessarily a straightforward thing, and anyone who thinks this is easy, I hate to disabuse you of the notion.
Paul, would you like to comment as well?
Yeah, I think Ewan's right, and they are a members-led organisation, and don't tell us what to do. And I think my observation was when I saw that question go up was actually there are other things beyond promotions that you can do, and I think the vast majority of retailers now have removed confectionery and high-fat, salty and sugary foods from till points. That was not mandated, but it became something where actually, you became socially unacceptable as a retailer if you had, and in our instance, we had Percy Pig on the till. We've done that. That did diminish sale in the confectionery category when we did that, and I'm sure every other retailer would have had a similar story. What it did, though, is it interrupted the customer journey, and we got loads and loads of contacts from our customers saying, "Where's Percy gone?" So you end up actually redirecting people to where Percy now is, rather than where he was. So I think you kind of moving the thing around. I think it comes back to this. My view is it's this inspiration piece. So inspire me to make healthy choices. Because it's interesting and it's a positive story. I think Sir Kenneth got that spot on this morning, is actually let's get some really positive case studies out there and talk about the positive things about eating well, rather than trying to constrain everybody, because from time to time everybody wants to indulge.
And just staying with you, but moving on to a slightly different angle, how do you see Finn developing over the next few years, and how do you think that will bring benefits back to the consumer?
We're pretty proud of where we've got to in Finn, and we've now got over 30 members. We've got another 50 members, or 50 expressions of interest, which is brilliant. It's a great quality problem to have. We've no idea how we're going to run an organisation with 85 members, which is the problem that we're facing into. But I gave the board a challenge a couple of weeks ago, which was to get the membership over 100 within a year. And the reason for doing that is not about the money. It's actually about getting real scale of representation, and particularly in the SME sector, because you'll have done the maths yourselves. If we've got 30 members and that's 160 billion of turnover, in the main they are big businesses. What we need to do is we need to encourage the SMEs to join, and a small business is £500 a year. Will we ever get to the point where if you're a small business it's free? I doubt it. So one of the things we're going to do is membership. The second one is I genuinely believe the work that we are doing with the regulators now is groundbreaking. And I'm looking at Big Ron, who phones me on a Friday and says, "Paul, need you to talk to your members about something." That, as a conversation, 2 years ago never happened. And I think our maturity with the relationship with FSS is extraordinary. That can only be a good thing in making the supply chains more resilient and more robust, and actually being able to live up to the promise that we make to our customers, all of us make to our customers every day, which is what it says on the pack is what is in the pack, and nothing else. I think we need to do, we're going to become, as we relax into it and we work out how to work together, because we're going to actually then be able to be more focused, more interventional where we need to be, and so on. And we'll understand our roles a bit more. I don't think there's, I don't know, I mean, I'll bring the guys into the conversation at a later point, I suspect, but I'm not sure that anything else like this exists. We're certainly having a lot of people that talk to us from around the world saying, can we become a member? And actually, they don't need to become a member of Fin. They need to establish and create their own version. But you know, there is good reason as to why we believe that Fin is going to actually should improve consumer confidence in the food industry in the future. And I think it's what we've done here, I think, is amazing. And if Chris Elliott was sat here, he would wax lyrical for it was better coming from him than it is from us. But
good. Any other questions from the audience? There's a lady here. Rod.
Thank you, Annie Anderson, University of Dundee. I'm really interested in the comment that it would be difficult to define healthy foods in terms of promotion and marketing. And also I like this idea of let's look at a can-do approach for things, because actually we do have a definition, which is that of nutrient profiling, which has been used to limit food advertising for children on television. And that system could be used elsewhere if there was a will to do it. In Scotland, there has been a recent move for healthy retailing within the NHS sector, which has been implemented throughout. So I think if the will is there, there's a system to do it.
Would you like to comment, Ewan?
Just kind of briefly on that, absolutely. And I was trying not to overspeak. I mean, the amount of work retailers done, I thought Paul spoke brilliantly about reformulation, and it's kind of something that I find a bit frustrating is that's taken as, oh yeah, you did that. That was an incredibly difficult, complex, really successful process that's made a huge difference towards increasing the options for consumers. I think nutrient profiling is an option to do it. I think we have to be careful though when you start looking at, you get into the detail and different brand lines, and that's where I come back to. There are certain product categories that are straightforward. There's ones where it's not remotely straightforward, and again, I come back to that kind of Treasury example as the evidence that even within soft drinks, which should be a relatively straightforward area, it actually proved really difficult to nail down the details. So it just is difficult, I'm afraid.
Yes, up at the back. Yes, thank you.
Hi. Thanks for all the speakers. I think the rising vegetable prices and rising fruit prices post-Brexit will probably still further increase the inequalities in consumption between different groups in Scotland. And do the panel think there's anything that government or anybody else can do about that, or do we just have to watch that happen?
Ewan, do you want to start with that?
I mean, as I kind of explained up, if we get a right deal and a deal that doesn't change the current relationships we've got, hopefully we shouldn't see those kind of problems coming through. That would be my kind of starting point, that this is still about, you know, a negotiation that accepts that getting the right deal on food is important. And I'm not underestimating for a second that's incredibly difficult, and it is. I'm not sure, you know, there's a lot of examples of the EU striking food-free trade deals, but there's also never been a situation where there's been a nation that is completely aligned with the EU standards at that starting point. So I think that's a question of political will, and it's really, really important to get it right. I absolutely accept the point you make about, you know, that risk, and particularly certain foods types. I mean, I've picked out broccoli and soft fruits, a really good example. Clearly, there are also fantastic, you know, vegetables and that produced within the UK. But even then, the seasonality does mean that you've got an impact across the year. So, yeah, it's a really big concern, and that's why we are going to shout very loudly about this for the next year to try and encourage government to take it really seriously.
Okay, thank you. You pass the mic along. And maybe while you're passing the mic along, maybe you could follow through with Alistair on the issue of inequalities. And have we looked at any differences in attitudes towards healthy eating in high and low income?
Everything I talked about today was very much the top level, general population, pardon me, level. We have within the sample, at every wave, by gender, by age, we tend to look at social grade rather than SIMD or anything like that. But I didn't have the time to go into any of that today. I think in terms of the diet and nutrition by social grade or inequalities, it is pretty much as you would expect it to be in terms of all of the challenges are amplified among that, among the lower social grades. I think potentially, and to tie it in with that last question as well, I think one of the more interesting ones is actually age. I think there are, I think the differences by social grade are potentially as you might expect them to be. I think the differences by age are potentially more interesting. I think the younger age group have very strange, very conflicting opinions and attitudes and behaviours when it comes to food safety. They're very relaxed, and because of that, they're far more likely to suffer the consequences of it. And I think when it comes to diet and nutrition, Paul was talking there about people being interested in different things and exciting things, and I think a younger audience are more interested in finding out those new things and experimenting with those new things. But the younger audience are also the people who are increasingly saying that food affordability is increasingly an issue for them. So I would worry to the question a minute ago in terms of I can't suggest how you could stop some of those food prices, but my worry would be not just for the more deprived areas, but also for across the younger generation, is going to potentially limit those habits forming in terms of healthy eating, which, going back to what we were talking about with role models this morning, that's going to scupper that at the early stage, because increasingly a younger audience are going to be priced out of experimenting with those healthier options.
Peter Morgan, I'm director of the Rowett Institute, and my question is to Paul, which is, you express your frustration about the health claim legislation and the inability to use incremental health benefits. And is this a disincentive to reformulation to make healthier products? And does possibly Brexit offer an opportunity to change the situation? Or is it that our trading situation is so intertwined that we won't be able to change much at all?
Yes, my frustration obviously came through. I think anything that we do needs to have integrity to it. So everything we do should be science-based. It has to be an evidence base to what we do. And it has to have a material impact. I agree with that, I accept that. I suppose my concern at the moment is that the European health claim regulation is structured in a way that actually there are very, very, very few health claims that have been approved, which does seem to me to suggest that actually we've all been wired wrong, or actually the regulation isn't fit for purpose. So there's a bit of me that says actually one of the opportunities within Brexit might be that from a UK-wide perspective we might be able to take a slightly different approach, and that good science, independently peer-reviewed science, could actually feature in customer communication. So yes, I apologise if my frustration came through, ladies and gentlemen, but it is one of those things where when you're sat on really robust science developed with your organisation, that you can't use it, that feels to me like we've got something wrong somewhere.
Now, we're approaching lunchtime, and I don't want Paul to faint, but I think there's been a lady trying to come in with a question for the last while, so we just take one final question. But don't worry about the questions that haven't been answered. There will be a response to them after. So if we could just take this last question.
This question's for you, Ian. We're talking about post-Brexit and about prices, the possibility of prices going up. Now, do you not think there'd be a possibility of like a knock-on effect like the war, where manufacturers grow more food, more products, natural products here, and we sell them at our own markets? So a change in the attitudes, less imports, more homegrown. So
I think they're probably, let's take as the WTO approach kind of happens, a sort of element where you have quite significant tariff barriers. I do think that would incentivise some level of domestic production.
Yeah,
but I think what we know about that, and actually there's several examples of various products, we can't produce those products as cheaply in the UK as can be done elsewhere. We don't have the kind of economic advantage of doing so. Well, I'm sure in a hypothetical it'd be nice, but the current evidence is that we're fairly well optimised on products we produce really well in Scotland. And I think that the economic benefit, and conversely, which leads to those kind of prices being stabilised off, spending more focus on the areas where we're really, really good and where we have an export opportunity is better than having to limit our export opportunities of tariffs and being forced to rely instead on domestic production. I absolutely accept, by the way, this is a liberal free trade vision of the idea of our trade with Europe, but on food, that it's better for us to focus on the things we're really, really good at. We don't have the best climatic conditions for certain types of food, particularly during a lot of the year, because it's been winter for about 1,000 years, it feels like. So because of that, we can produce them. We can't produce them as cheaply and sustainably. I'm not persuaded that without kind of very significant intervention, that would be possible, particularly in the short term. And consequently, that's why we think prices would rise. I think you would see it in domestic production. I don't think that offsets the costs. That's our view on it.